Hey everybody, welcome. It's Chris and Rick Talk Guitars again. Chris, how you doing?
Good. Good morning.
We're still doing our remote stuff because of COVID and just logistics, but we're keeping the train rolling, man. We wanted to talk about something that is pretty fresh in everybody's minds. It's the Beatle documentary called Get Back, where it chronicles the recording of songs from Let It Be. And actually there's songs in there from Abbey Road too, that they're working on, which is cool. So yeah, I mean, Chris and I both watched the doc, and I know a bunch of other people that watched the doc, and I just loved it. And we thought it'd be good to talk about. So do you want to start off with any initial thoughts you have about the documentary or any place to jump in? I mean, there's so much to talk about.
I think just let it take us where it goes. I mean, it was fascinating. Had you seen was it called Let It Be, the movie that?
You know what? I tried to think. I don't think I'd ever seen that movie.
Okay. I saw that. So it's really interesting from that perspective to see the Let It Be movie and then see that. I saw the Let It Be maybe 3 years ago, 4 years ago or something like that. And that was the first time that I had ever seen it. So it really is. I mean, as you know, a lot of reviewers are saying, is like, if you see that, you just have this down view of what was going on. It's like they were miserable. They were at each other's throats. So it's super fascinating to see what Peter Jackson put together from that same footage, and just the vibe is completely different.
Yeah, because that's what I hadn't watched it, but exactly that's the vibe people were saying was coming through with that Let It Be documentary initially released. And I'm going to watch it because I want to see the difference between the two. Yeah, that's the perception I had when hearing people talk about that first one.
So what did you think what was the most fascinating, if you could single out one element of Get Back, what was the most fascinating element to you?
I've thought a lot about this, and the coolest thing for me was the way everybody, not only the Beatles, but the supporting cast, just the human nature, just it humanized everybody much more so than, I'd previously thought. Because I remember when I was 10, I got Let It Be for my birthday, that album. My parents bought me that album. And so that album's been with me for my whole life. I love that album. And, people used to piss on that album too. Like, oh, that's a shitty album, blah, blah, blah. The songs, but I've always loved that album. And so I'm surprised that I never really watched the Let It Be documentary. I don't know why I hadn't, because the cool thing about it is he just, it's stream of consciousness. Each episode is like, fuck, I don't even know how long it is, but you're seeing them just in this environment interact with each other and the other people for a long, long time. So you see these dynamics and all this shit going on. For me, it was just kind of the humanization of everybody in the story. How about you? What was the main takeaway for you, or something that really grabbed you?
It's going to be hard to pick just one thing, but my initial response to seeing it was like, oh my God, these are children. They're like children. They have all these decades of mythology attached to these people and their instruments and their songs. They're just like dumb kids, like we were. And I think anybody that's gone through band rehearsals where you're working on stuff, recording sessions where you're like getting the basic tracks and everybody's in the same room, or just like hanging out. I mean, it's instantly relatable to all of that. It was fascinating. It took me a while to get over that. I'm like, my gosh, I forgot how young they were, like in their early 20s or something like that. Yeah. Everything of that era, like the clothes, and the guitars for a guitar player. It was just like a feast. How many of these guitars have you read over the years about? This is about John Lennon's, Strip Casino, the Rosewood Telecaster. There they are with these instruments. They're their instruments, and they're kind of into them too. I mean, John Lennon mentions, I'm leaving my guitar. That's how you'll know I'll be back. Yeah. So they're actually seeing them when they're not just these mythological things. They're actually the tools that they're working with, and they're into. I mean, George is showing up with a different guitar, on different days, and you can tell he's fiddling with it, and he's like into them. And that was really cool. And that's another thing that you mentioned. It's like humanizing. These aren't gods. These are kids, and they got their stuff, and they're into their gear, and they're creating like history. And you get to watch that, which is fascinating. I'm probably going to watch it again.
Yeah, I think I am too. I never got over the age thing, man. I mean, exactly. They just look like babies. And the supporting cast is what killed me. Michael Thomas, no, what's his name? Michael Thomas Hoag.
Yeah, yeah.
He looked like a young Orson Welles chomping on the cigar all the time, but he looked like he was 12.
Exactly.
You know, and he's always dressed in like a business suit or some, and I just couldn't get over it. I kept looking at his face going, dude, you look like you're 12. But I loved that. And like everybody, Alan Parsons is in there as a young, snotty kid, like, you know, sitting in these sessions and
looking around with disdain.
Exactly.
His name, Mal Evans, was awesome.
Oh God, I loved him.
Yeah, he was great. And the look, you know, the fursuits, everything. I mean, you could talk for, 3 hours about just like the clothes.
Oh man, the clothes just killed me. Like those boots that Harrison was wearing, those Tibetan fucking whatever they were, slipper things. And then what killed me too was when, again, this kind of highlights the bubble that a lot of these artists kind of find themselves in, that they can really get anything they want. Like when he was offhandedly going, you know, could somebody go get me several pairs of black slip-on shoes? I've never had, and I'm size 8. And so sure. And then a couple of scenes later, he's wearing these slip-on black shoes. Like somebody went out and got a bunch of shoes for him to try on, and just the endless stream of like toast and marmalade and tea and cigarette. Like somebody was constantly like bringing them shit. That just fascinated me too. But yeah, I never got over the age thing. That's one of the things I tripped out on and just enjoyed so much. And exactly like Paul McCartney was just such a stud, like this handsome, you know, guy in the prime of his life, super talented. Oh, and I guess another thing that stuck out with me too is just how kind of rudderless they were after Epstein died, right? He was the father figure, the manager that kind of kept them on task. And like you were saying, they're just a bunch of young kids winging it. It's like, well, what are we going to, they kept talking about whatever this big event was going to be, and it changed every day. It was so funny. So I dug that too. Just the rudderless young dudes just trying to get this shit done,
One of the things that struck me that was a little hard for me to deal with at first is I always really dug George Harrison. Yeah. And, I love his songs. He just seems like just a cool, like mellow dude. His passive aggressiveness in that was kind of pretty hardcore. I forget the exact saying, was something to the effect of, we could do it that way and it'll be shit.
Yeah.
Like, yeah, go ahead and do that. But if you want shit.
Yeah.
Another thing that I tried to keep in mind while I was watching the whole thing is historic perspective. What was going on with these people outside of this room at this time. And we all know, George Harrison was like, he had all these songs and he was like trying to come into it as a songwriter. So obviously, yes, he's super, super frustrated, but it's really interesting to see him handle it in a really human way. Like, all right, you're going to try to cut me out of this, fuck you. I'm just going to be an asshole. So there's that. And to think about, how goofy John Lennon is. And it's like his smack period, keeping the historical element in perspective while watching it is really something pretty fascinating.
Yeah. And I'm glad you brought that up, because I kind of had the same reaction, but then I thought about, okay, think about how long these guys have been together playing music. Like George was 13, I think, when he joined the band, or really young. And so, we're looking at this is 1969. Well, they'd been together for many, many, many years. And 64, it's 5 years from 64 when they kind of broke, right? But before 64, they were together for years before that, playing, slogging it out in Hamburg. I thought it was cool that they kept mentioning kind of Hamburg and some of their old, stomping grounds or stuff kind of in the context of this, which was kind of cool to me.
Yeah. Oh, totally. And there must have been some element of them, like some of the goofing and some of them pulling the old songs out is just being aware of the film crew and doing it kind of for them. There's probably some element of that, but the rest of it is, like I said, anybody who's spent any time in a rehearsal space where you're working on new songs, and you're just dicking around. That's, to see them doing that is like worth it alone.
Oh, yeah. And again, talking about the gear, I thought it was so funny, too, how they were not precious at all about the gear, just like setting it down like willy nilly. And you know what I mean? Nowadays they've got guitar stands and all this other shit. And people, like imagine you with your ES345 and like just, clopping it on a chair, or it was just, I just thought it was so cool. And part of it to me, like you were saying, these are their tools, and that's the way they kind of approached it. It's like, okay, what am I going to play here? Oh yeah, I think the Rosewood Telly would be good here. And another thing I thought was cool about the gear was how much they were playing bass lines on like the Rosewood Telly or that Fender baritone guitar or whatever the fuck that was.
Yeah, the 16 bass thing. Or
Yeah,
whatever.
yeah. I thought that was fascinating.
Yeah.
I never knew that. Like some of that bass stuff was being played on those other guitars and stuff. But yeah.
You can see the Lucy, the red Les Paul start to take a dive.
Yeah.
And then just sitting around, you're like, uh-oh.
I know.
But that's the thing. And I mean, I coming back to that now, I mean, it's just, these are historic instruments. I mean,
Yeah.
probably every one of those in the movie was featured in some sort of like guitar magazine, like profile. And so, you talked about them. Paul McCartney has his favorite bass that has the set list taped to the side.
Yeah.
I mean, how many times have you read about that?
Yeah.
And there it is. It's just this thing. And Paul McCartney seemed like the least gear savvy person there. He's like, I like this one. It's light. They're trying to get him to play another bass.
Yeah.
And with John Lennon, one of the things that I just thought was so cool is like seeing the human element is they were working on one of the many, many times through Get Back. And, by this time he's already got his solo and he's kind of working it out and he's kind of into it. You can see he's kind of like, oh, I got this part here. And so he's kind of goofing and he's playing it. And it's like, yeah, he found his part. He's into it. He's playing it. He's still working out the little details to it, but he's got it. And he plays it over and over and he's kind of, noodling on it. And it's like, that's the part that ends up in, Get Back. So seeing that is like, I don't know. It's just completely fascinating.
Yeah. Well, it's, I had the same reaction when I was watching him work out his part on the little steel guitar they had.
Yeah.
He was grinding away on it. He wanted to find a part. And I dug that too. It's like, he's really into this. He's into like, and I also, that's another thing I really dug about seeing them in this context was, like Ringo walked in and he was plunking on the piano and going, I've got this silly song, Octopus's Garden. And then George comes over and goes, well, how about this? And, this would be a good, this, you should resolve here. And just the thoughtfulness they approached their songs with was so cool to me because it kind of reinforced that, they write great songs, but they worked at it. They were thoughtful about structure, about arrangement, everything. And they helped each other out on these songs. I thought it was so cool.
Yeah. No, like I said, I might need to see it again. I mean, just seeing like Linda Eastman and Yoko Ono, like giggling.
Yeah.
Just hanging out, it's like they're kind of bored and they're kind of goofing around. They're catching up and, cracking jokes. It's just really human. I think you hit it on the head when you said the human element to these myths.
Yeah. I mean, that's the thing that just hit. And exactly like you were saying, just the interaction between Yoko and Linda and then them and the rest of the band. Like there's that jam session where, Yoko's doing her vocal thing and Paul's on drums and they're just having fun, just being silly. And again, the silliness is what I dug. They're just silly people, which was so cool. Cause exactly. I mean, we mythologize all these people and we mythologize their gear. And when you see them in this context, it's just like, these are just guitars to them. These are just like, they're tools of the trade and they're just, using them to write songs and to record. And that's another thing I thought was so cool too, is looking at the recording gear and like the 4 tracks and the 8 tracks, that was cutting edge back then,
It was.
But they've got these big levers and things. And I just thought I tripped out on that too, looking at that.
But that was great sounding stuff. I would love, and that's one thing that it really made me want to do. I mean, I've had a fair amount of studio experience. Capturing things that way is cool. Like, where you're all in the same room, you know what I mean? But things are ready to go. If you get something cool, you'll capture it. I mean, we've done similar things, but it's usually if you're in the same room, everything's isolated and you don't have that experience of like just hanging out, let's get through that. And that was really cool to see it done like that.
That's another thing I really dug too, was the fact that they were so dedicated to recording these songs live. And I think you and I talked about, John and Paul kept saying, well, if I play keyboards on this song, then we lose a guitar and we can't do that. And then enter Billy Preston and things just went to another level because that cat just brought this soulful electric piano. And I love the sound of those old Rhodes and electric pianos. They just sound so cool. And Billy Preston's keyboard work all over that. I mean, he played organ on some of the songs, and it just sounds so freaking cool. Yeah, I dug that part of it too.
Yeah, when he showed up, it was that kind of put an end to the pull my finger jokes and what. It's like, it's time to get serious. We got this serious cat, and everything just kind of, the whole mood just went up. That was great. Yeah, that captured that really well.
Yeah. And I thought it was cool too how, again, like when they started out in that big warehouse or in Twickenham or whatever that was such a strange setup. And then again, like the mood changed from there when they went to Apple Studios. It's like all of a sudden they became looser. It seemed like they were interacting more with each other, and it just seemed like more conducive for them to be creative and stuff. But it's funny because Paul was lamenting that, because he's like, well, here we are in another studio in London again, making a record. Like his vision was like that they were going to do some bigger thing. Like, we're making a movie and we're going to do this big, whatever this big thing is that we can't decide on or articulate yet. And I thought that was kind of funny, how he was he had this vision in his mind. And when they went to Apple, he was kind of like lamenting, like, okay, here we are again in a studio in London recording an album again. Like, it's just, this is what we've done all the time.
Yeah. And George he was way into that. That was the thing that struck me too. Is like, we're seeing this room that they moved to, the Apple room. And it's just, shit strewn around and they're all sitting there. But you could definitely see he was like, this is really cool. I want to do this more.
Yeah.
And up to that point in their career, it seems like they would have been in cooler situations because it just looks like a room full of shit. But he was totally into it. And that definitely, you saw his mood go up and he got really involved after that. That was cool.
Yeah. And back to like them winging it. I was fascinated by that too. It's like, and Paul kept trying to articulate things, but not very well. He couldn't. That's another thing I thought that was interesting is the way they communicate with each other was really, I don't know. Did you get that sense? Like, I couldn't even understand what Paul was trying to get at sometimes. It's like, I kind of got the gist of it, but it's like, what are you really saying? Like, I don't understand what do you want? Like.
Right. He probably just wanted to do everything.
Yeah. And maybe he didn't even know, but but I thought it was funny when they were all spitballing and like Lennon's talking about giant plastic cubes that he can take home after the filming or some weird shit. And like,
get an engineer in here. I need my mic nut tightened.
Oh my God. Well, that's another thing I thought that was so funny is like, the mics were kind of all just like loose and hanging, like it just all seemed kind of tenuous and just kind of haphazard. But yeah, it was so funny. I just totally dug it.
And the rooftop, that was awesome. That was a great payoff. And, in the Let It Be, I think there's a couple versions of the songs, but not, a lot of the footage isn't there. So it's great to see all of that footage. And historically, that poor Bobby Cop, who goes down in history as the biggest asshole.
I found that to be so hilarious. That young, he looked like he was 12 and he's this cop coming to, because we've had 30 complaints about noise in London. It's like, he was so stodgy for being such a young dude, but I guess he was just doing his job. But, oh my God. Yeah. I thought that was endlessly fascinating and funny. And well, the thing that cracked me up too is like when they first went up to the roof, they went on the outside of the building and, they were dragging each other up on the outside. And then when they did the performance, they all just walked through the door on the roof. There must've been a staircase inside that just leads you up to the roof of the building. It's like,
I hadn't noticed that. I'll have to check that out.
Yeah. But it's like, cause they're dragging Lindsay Hogg over the side in his suit, and up on the roof. But yeah, the rooftop thing was a big payoff because I'd only seen bits and pieces of those performances, but seeing them all like that, just them banging off songs like that was so cool. And again, like, I really got off on the joy. It seemed like there was true joy in Lennon and McCartney and the whole band really playing these songs. Maybe those two more so than the other guys even, but which is weird, I think, because those two are the ones that historically that, there's this mythology about the rift between them and all the stuff all the baggage they had together. But those two especially seem to be really enjoying themselves,
Oh yeah, absolutely. It looks like Paul was really into it when the cops came out too.
Yeah.
He turned around and saw him. He was like, "Oh, this is cool."
Yeah.
Some drama.
Yeah.
One thing to keep in mind is, I don't know if you've ever had to try to play guitar outside when it's cold.
Oh, dude.
I mean, Lennon makes a comment about that, but I'm like, how are they even fucking doing this? I mean,
I know.
like my hands are cold. They just clamp right up, and it's just like the strings get really kind of tight. You know, you're sticking everywhere, and he flawlessly plays his little solo.
Yeah.
And get it back and everything else. It was great.
No, I thought the same thing.
No, it was definitely not just for guitar players, but there's a ton of guitar player stuff in there. Just knowing what happened historically with Fender, and coming in just before that and hooking them up with Fender, it was a big win for Fender.
Yeah.
And so you see all that Silverface.
The drip edge amps, I thought were totally cool to see. Yeah.
And that's where George's new guitar. So it's great. I mean, and that we got to see three of George's historic guitars, because he had the Rosewood Telecaster, he had Lucy, the Les Paul Standard, and he had the Beboppy, the blue painted Stratocaster.
Oh, Rocky, is it called
Rocky?
Yeah. Well, the guitar I dug was the jumbo he was playing, the Gibson.
Oh yeah,
that was freaking a beautiful guitar, man.
Yeah, I think John had one too, but it got stolen.
Yeah,
so he was leaning on George's. If I don't know, I might be wrong on that.
Again, like, I think the cool thing about this documentary is that it shows. I just love seeing the songs evolve too. From a germ of an idea to what you're used to hearing all your life as the finished product of that thing. And I loved hearing the alternate versions of Get Back too. Like, sometimes you can kind of go, okay, now I know why they settled on this one version, because that's the one that, had all the pieces put together, but
No, and if watching the movie is worth it alone to see Paul McCartney on his bass, dicking around and just going, and then he stumbles into Get Back. Yeah. It's like you get to see from the very slightest germ to the finished song, where, I mean, when you can see the light kind of going off in his head, and then he hits it.
Yeah.
So that was super fascinating. I'd forgotten all about that. But he's just like, you've got a document of somebody like just dicking around on like one string on the bass, and all of a sudden you watch the song emerge, and that was super cool.
Well, and you see that it's work, that I wish I would have saw something like this when I was younger, because again, like I told you all the time, like when I was younger, a songwriter, I would just write something and think, okay, I'm done. It came to me in a dream and I wrote it down and I'm done. It's like, no, you can edit this fucking thing and make it better, and so that's another thing I thought was so cool about seeing this is like, and I think everybody should see something like this where you see artists work at their craft, because it's not just this thing where you have this epiphany and you record it and go to lunch and it's all, it's work. But it's the payoff is so rewarding when you end up with a song like Get Back or an album like that. I mean, it's like, and so I think that's one of the really cool things about this too, is just seeing the work ethic or just the process of how these things are created. And, I dug that so much.
Yeah. And the other big thing to take away with this is, as we all assumed, Ringo is fantastic.
He is awesome, man. Like, I was reading, here's another thing, online people are like, oh yeah, well, you can totally see Ringo was in the right place at the right time. It's like, fuck you, dude. He is amazing in and of himself. Like, I just dug.
This cool dude, man. Just
totally
about him, like his vibe. And I've heard people say that he looks really bored, like he's sleeping and bored. But no, I mean, he was just available. He was there, and he was ready to give his input. Yeah, I mean, he was the one that was always on time.
Yeah, close. He was the one there when waiting for John to show up or all the other guys.
Right. And was really polite about letting people know when he farted. All around stand-up dude, that Ringo.
And I thought it was interesting too when you saw the glimmer of things, the glimmer of events or things coming into play that were really nails in the coffin. Like Lennon was so into Klein, the manager, and I thought it was cool that Glyn Johns must have went to that same meeting, like up on a couple floors up, and he was not impressed with that guy at all. He's like, yeah, he seems
Oh.
like a dick, essentially. I'm paraphrasing, but Glenn Johns was like, yeah, guy seems like kind of a dick, like.
And he was. And yeah, and just like busting this like decades of myth about Yoko Ono breaking up the Beatles, which is total bullshit. It's like, yeah, there she is breaking up the Beatles. She's hanging out joking with Linda Eastman, and I don't know. It busts a lot of myths, and that's great. And it's just a feast for the eyes. It's like Mad Men with rock and roll and real shit. So.
Yeah. And like you're saying, I mean, I was just tripping on the clothes, the gear, there were no tuners, no guitar tuners, like nothing, just, and
they were only out of tune a couple of times.
I think, I would recommend anybody watch. Yeah, you don't have to be a musician to watch. That's the thing I love about this. And I think Peter Jackson did such a great job of just letting things happen and over a long period of time, like on film, like not doing a lot of,
right.
Because you just see them in this environment, and it's so humanizing, and it's so cool to see them all interacting together. And with, again, like I said, with that cast of characters was just freaking hilarious. McCartney brings his daughter. That's another thing I thought that was so cool is they're recording these songs. This is an album. This is a big deal, but there's just people in there milling about while they're making this shit.
And that was my thought. They must Yoko and Linda must have had like the patience of saints a lot of times for being in there. And that's another thing I wanted to point out is a lot of the reviews, which were, universally praised, but a lot of people mentioned that, well, it was a little long. It could have been shorter. If they shortened it, you would not get the vibe of like how hard this stuff comes. You know what I mean? And so you take out any of that. I don't think it was too long at all. I mean, this stuff takes time. And what are you going to do? Cut it out? So you just see, well, here's where he gets this. It needed, I think Peter Jackson used really good judgment on what to leave in. And, I don't think it needed to be any shorter or you would have lost a lot of what you got.
Totally. I totally agree. Because that's the cool thing about watching this is seeing what a process it was for them to create this stuff and also create whatever that end thing was going to be, like that rooftop concert. I was fascinated by that too. Like whatever they all had in their heads about, like, at first it was a TV show, or I guess they were wanted to do, or some, whatever it was. But yeah, I mean, that's the thing I thought was so valuable about having it be as long as it was. And I saw an interview with him, and he started out, of course, with a much longer movie, and he pared it down. But yeah, I think, and he even said, yeah, I think this is the right amount of time to tell this story. And I think he's absolutely right. I mean, I just enjoyed it so much.
It's great. I don't think we really even have to tell anybody to see it, because I think everybody, I didn't have Apple TV. I just had to find a way, bless my sister's heart, to find a way to get in to see it. Yeah. So, I can't think, even if you're not a Beatles fan, it's fascinating. If you're a fan of rock and roll history, it's worth watching. That's all that people have been talking about since it came out.
Yeah, I agree. I don't think you have to be a Beatles fan per se, or a musician or anything. I think it's just interesting to see this process and all these humans in this context working on this project, super cool. Well, you got anything else you want to say about this, or have we talked it out?
I think, we could talk about this for another 3 hours, but I think pretty much summed up my thoughts, the big thoughts that I had, I guess.
Yeah. Well, I guess that's it. Yeah, it was a good talk. I really enjoyed it. I think I'm going to watch it again too.
Yeah, I'm going to watch it again.
I got to do it. My nephew watched it, and he and I he's much younger than me, and I don't know how much into the Beatles he is, but he totally dug it for all the reasons you and I just described. It was really cool. We had a good conversation about it, and he really dug it. It was cool. All right, man. Well, thanks for listening as always, and keep the emails and messages coming in, because we really enjoy hearing from you people out there. It's so cool. Listen to us on Spotify and Apple Podcasts and wherever you listen to podcasts, and we'll talk to you soon.
Goodbye.